entitled Fantastic Faith. I don't know about you, but I just kind of like the ring of that, and it's one of the things I'm going to talk about in confirmation class when we end this service, is how wonderful and how amazing the Christian life can be. And one of the ways I like to describe the Christian life to people who are considering it as an option is I says, we had this farm truck when I was growing up that just had two-wheel drive. It was a nice farm truck. We could throw fence posts on there, and we could feed, watch the cattle. And remember one March year, we had a rack on the back of it. And so that if we had a bunch of snow, as oftentimes happens in March, I hear it's forecasted for this next week, we might get a little bit of snow. Just to clean up the air a little bit and get rid of some of the viruses that are floating around. And there's always a positive part to things. But, we had a rack on the back, and we used to hang off that rack and catch calves by the tail. We drive like the rodeo. We drive up next to them, catch them by the tail, and then hang on for dear life. And then we'd open the door and put them in the back of the rack until we had a bunch of them. We'd take them to the farmyard, and we got to get some more. Well, I've noticed there's farmers today and ranchers have a lot of cattle. I got a text the other day from somebody, and I said, so how's calving going? They said, oh, it's going great. We have over 100 calves on the ground. And I said, how many have left? 450. They have 450 calves left. And it's the wives of that farming arrangement that do most of the calving. And so it's an amazing world that we live in. And but then the year came, this is my point, the year came when my dad says, maybe it's time to invest in a four-wheel drive pickup truck. And it's just going to be helpful. And I was amazed to see how wonderful that was, how fantastic that was. And here's the illustration. Here's the word picture. Going to church is like having a vehicle that has just two-wheel drive. But having a vehicle that has four-wheel drive can really be a big help, especially if we get a lot of snow, or if we have to drive on icy roads, or if we, in fact, sometimes pickup trucks and four-wheel drive can get through as much snow as a tractor, two-wheel drive tractor. And it's pretty incredible. So what we want to do is put our faith in four-wheel drive, and that's what happens in this passage for Abraham. He was walking around, living a godly life, living a good life, and then God comes to him and says, Abraham, I am about ready to put your life in four-wheel drive, to make your faith a life of adventure, and I'm going to pour out my blessing, and you're going to have a great name, and you're going to develop a great nation, and it's really going to be amazing. So in verse 1, here we have it, Genesis chapter 12, a fantastic faith. The Lord God said to Abram. Now, later on, a couple of chapters after this, I think it's about chapter 17, he changes his name to help him understand that he is going to be the father of a great nation. But first, Abraham was going to have to do something special. He was going to have to go from where he was living, from his country, and the Hebrew word there for country is the same word that we find in the bottom of the verse where it says land, okay? He was going to have to go from his land or his country, what he was used to and he was going to take all of his people, and he was going to have to take whatever he owned and move away from his father, and move away from his relatives, and move away from what he knew and what he understood and what he was comfortable with, to a land that God was going to show him. Isn't it true that for much of life, our lives are oftentimes in a time of transition? I remember coming to a pretty good-sized church one time, and was moving from kind of a church about this size to one that was maybe 2-3 times larger than this. And it had built on a great big fellowship hall that seated 300 people around tables. And it was in a church in South Dakota where people would come and you'd have meetings. And it was different than the United Methodist process. It was a call process. And I remember our son, at the end of the service, I preached a message, and our son, Isaac, we were walking down this big indoor ramp that they had, and he turns to me and says, Dad, we're really not going to come here, are we? It was way too big for him. It was way too much for him. And I says, sometimes God calls us, and he moves us in a new direction. And I says, we'll have to just see what the Lord is going to do. And we'll have to be welcoming of whatever God is guiding us into. In fact, one of the things we'll notice about Abraham is that he heard God's voice. Some people still today ask the question, how can I know God's will for my life, and how can I hear his voice? Well, the average person, average believer and Christian might say, well, it's important to take time to pray to God, and that's true. But it's even more important to take time to listen to God. Oftentimes, especially in America, people are in such a hurry. You know, they may take a couple of minutes to read a devotional, and they may snack on prayer, but oftentimes they don't take enough time to feast on prayer, to quiet themselves down and to really invite God to come and speak to them. Oftentimes we're distracted by a lot of different things. Now, you know, my wife has been recovering from this back surgery, and at one point the TV quit working, and it was what she was using to occupy her mind, to keep her mind off the pain that she was having. And about every 4 hours, we'd give her more medication, and every 2 hours, we'd give her like Tylenol to kind of take the edge off of it. And at one point, when the TV quit working, she made this comment, that this is inhumane. Life without television is inhumane. Well, whatever works for people. And I tried to give her this little word of encouragement when I had my open heart surgery. I prayed and prayed and prayed and hoped that the pain would just go away. And it didn't. It didn't mean that God wasn't there. But he was inviting me and giving me the opportunity to work through this time of discomfort and this time of pain. And it doesn't mean that we lose our confidence in the value of prayer, because, prayer can do amazing things, but it doesn't automatically mean that our life is going to be pain-free. And it wasn't pain-free for Abraham, because Abraham's faith was going to get tested, and it was going to get stretched. And before his faith became fantastic and incredible, he was going to have to make some sacrifices. Verse 2, God is saying here, I'm going to build you a picture. And here's the picture in your mind's eye. I will make you a great nation, not just a little nation, not just a bump up. It's going to be the greatest, most amazing nation in all the world. And then I will bless you. And that's how I'm going to make it great. And the word bless here means God was going to pour out his favor. Now, God doesn't pour out his favor onto just anyone. No. The idea here is that God was pouring out his favor and offering his blessing because Abraham was living a holy and a righteous life. There's some people think, well, I can be a Christian and I can live any way that I want. Not true. You can be a Christian in America and live any way that you want, but there's going to be a difference between a person that experiences God's full blessing and God's full favor and a Christian that is just getting by as a believer. Last Wednesday, we had a Bible passage during Lent here, and Tyrell did a nice job of leading that. And so I always enjoy giving those opportunities for people in the congregation. But the one word there, Jesus was inviting people to follow him, and it meant more than just come along. No, it meant that when Jesus was inviting believers to come and follow him, it meant that he was going to be present in developing a relationship with them. And that's the same concept and the same biblical principle found here in the Old Testament, as God is saying to Abraham, I'm not just going to give you a blessing and then you're going to go on, on your own doing whatever you want to do. No, it's not going to work that way, because I am going to be present in your life in an incredible way, in a fantastic way. And then I'm going to make your name great. A lot of great people in the world. You know, think about great names in America. I Googled it. Today. Some of the greatest names in America. Guess what was on the top? George Washington. Every once in a while, when I go to pick up a little bit of medication, every once in a while I need a little bit to get my stomach settled down, they'll ask me for my name, and I'll tell them, George Washington. You know, nobody believes that. No, because they know who I am, and I'll only do it to people who I am, who know me. But you know, it's a great name because of how he lived his life and how he cared for other people. And other times I'll say, well, I'm Abraham Lincoln. That's the second most popular name in America. Well, guess what happens when you get down to about spot number 7? You get into the music world. Who's the most recognizable name? Elvis Presley. Absolutely. Amazing names. Well, God is saying, I'm going to make your name great. And later on in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, we talk about Abraham as being a person of greatness, of the father of faith. And he goes on to say, and you will be a blessing. I will not only bless you, but you're going to be a blessing to other people as well. You know, I've listened to a lot of different people, pastors on Facebook, talk about how this next Sunday today, they're going to make their service as safe as they possibly can. They're going to do everything. They're going to clean the rails, and they're going to wash the hand, and there's going to be hand sanitizers. And we're going to, avoid on shaking hands, and we're going to try to keep some good space and so on and so forth. The one thing I haven't heard much of is, guess what? What are we going to do to help people who come down with the virus? What are we going to do when someone doesn't have enough food and they come down with the virus? How are we going to help? They can't get out of their homes. They're supposed to be quarantined in. And our son is a project manager for a high-end assisted living complex in Sioux Falls. There are 300 people in that place. And 300 workers. There's 600 people. If they come down with one person with the C-19 virus, they have to quarantine all 600 because of the potential of being in contact. Wow. But the question is more than how can I live a healthy life? How can I, keep my distance from other people? The best and better question is, how can I be a blessing today, right now in America, to share God's love and to love my neighbor? Well, I can tell you it's not by hoarding toilet paper. And verse 3 says, and I will bless those who bless you. When we encourage someone, sometimes that encouragement comes back. It's not why we encourage other people, but sometimes that's the way it works. I remember when I went to college, I noticed, there was just something missing. It was my first year, and I was a freshman. I was 1,000 miles from home. I'd never been there before. I just signed up, and I went. And I just kind of fit in, and there was people who had been there for 2 years and 3 years and 4 years, and they had a 5-year program back in those days in Edmonton. It was a Bible college, and I says, there's something missing. And the one part that after a while, as I prayed about it and I listened to other students, the one part that I realized was missing was the spirit of being a blessing. That oftentimes when young people leave their homes, they just want to kind of have fun. They just kind of want to somehow go and fit in. But the one piece that is so important in life and in church life and in school life and in work life is to be able to wake up every morning and say, good morning, Lord. I have decided I am going to be a blessing to someone. And I'm going to be a blessing to every person I meet. And God is saying, Abraham, the fantastic lifestyle that I have planned for you is a life of encouragement. It's a life of sharing God's presence with other people so that it's more than just us being happy. It's about all of us enjoying life together. It's about enjoying God's presence and God's favor by showing honor and by showing respect, and how important that is. And whoever curses you, I will curse. You know, the first time I read that, it kind of caught me by surprise. And I asked myself the question, you know, I was in the days before I understood Hebrew, and it was before the days I understood Greek and all those other things. And I understood the kind of a little bit about the idea of blessing and being a blessing and showing honor and showing respect. But, you know, the cursing part is, wow, you know, God is kind of an umpire here, that if someone, you know, does something bad, he's going to blow a whistle and there's going to be consequences. And, of course, the word curse here goes way back to the garden when the serpent had tricked Adam and Eve to give in to the temptation to eat of the tree that was forbidden. And the curse came in the fact that this snake would be crawling on its belly for the rest of history, for the rest of life. There was consequences for what happened to that. And there would be consequences for Adam and Eve, and there would be a difficulty and a great pain in childbearing. There would be sweat and difficulty in hard work. Before that, life was great. When I went to school, I was so fortunate in all the way through school that I went to a school that had lots of high value on honor and respect. And the older students went out of their way to help the younger students figure that out. If a younger student, you know, didn't understand that, maybe they were transferring in from a country school, or they were transferring in from some other place, or maybe they were growing up in a home that was too lenient and had no discipline, the older students would come alongside them and say, oh, by the way, that's not how we act in this school. We always honor our teachers. We always honor our superintendents. We always honor our principals. And we always respect them, and we listen to them. And what an amazing way to grow up. So there's going to be this balance between being a blessing and finding consequences. Remember in Washington State, and I probably shared this illustration one time before, I was invited over to have a meal as a youth pastor in a home, and then the home had a young teenager who was 16 years old and hardly never came to church, and the parents were beside themselves and wanting to figure out, well, what can I do to interest this person? And I said, well, tell me a little of how you created instruction and guidance and discipline. And they says, well, it's probably our fault, but we just never disciplined them. We just let this person do whatever they wanted to do, and now they're into drugs, they won't listen to us, and we don't know what to do. I says, you know, once you have surrendered your role as a parent, it's very, very hard to get it back. It can be done, but you have to do it in such a way that there's going to be a willingness, that you're not going to close someone's spirit, and you're going to be able to reestablish godly guidelines for the Christian home. Verse 4, so Abram went and he obeyed the Lord as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he was sent out to Haran. He was not a young person, but he was young enough to run to be the president of the most powerful nation in the world. Isn't that interesting? We have a max year that United Methodist can serve as clergy. It's like 72 years old. It's either, I think it's 70 or 72. I'm not even quite sure. I think it's 72. And a United Methodist pastor can experience the joy of the Lord and love their ministry and do everything they want to do. But once they hit the magical year of 72, then they're expected to retire. Well, you know, there's a guy down in Aberdeen, South Dakota, that's been in the ministry for a long, long time. He was in his 90s. Some of you are smiling, so you know who I'm talking about. Reverend Salem. He did my mother's funeral. And my brother from Tennessee, about a year ago, said, you know, every once in a while, I'll look him up. And he's still one of my favorite preachers to listen to. Well, Abraham was 75 years old. And he was not a young person. And he was having to move his entire family. And it's pretty interesting that Abraham was a very welcoming person. In the second line there, it says, and Lot went with him. The historical part to this is that Lot has lost his parents. And Abraham went out of his way to welcome Lot to be a part of his family. And so we go on here. So he takes his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot and all their possessions that they had accumulated. And then they head out toward Haran. And they set foot in the land of Canaan. And when they arrived there, Abraham in verse 6 says, traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moriah. And the great tree in the Hebrew means it was a great oak tree. You know how great big oak trees can get? It was there by Moriah and by Shechem. And at the time, the Canaanites were in the land. Let me tell you, stop a little bit about the Canaanites. The Canaanites, today we would say it, they were different. Okay? Now, I grew up in a very German home. Okay? When I went to a farm school, my first 5 years of school or so, one of my first teachers for a year or two understood German and understood English. And then they needed to get a new teacher, and the teacher only understood English. And we were getting ready to start the school year, and my parents would say, well, today or this year, it's going to be different. Because now we all have to learn to speak English. Well, they did that, and they did it gracefully, and discovered after a while that this person was really a wonderful, wonderful, amazing teacher, even though they weren't German, living in a German community, and they didn't speak German. Well, that's what it was like for Abraham. He had all different kinds of cultures in Canaan. The Canaanites believed in a lot of different things, and it wasn't always just the one most powerful God, Yahweh. And these people were just really, really different. God was bringing Abraham to a place that was really foreign, really different, to be a blessing and to bring God's favor. And then, in verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give you this land. I will give you this land. Reminds me of the migration of people from Europe to America. And oftentimes they started way out in New York and they came across, and how in the world they ended up way out here, I'll never understand. But, you know, they did, and they could get a parcel of land and start farming it and start owning it and make a living. And that must have been a little bit of what it's like. And I remember a number of years ago when our family was recovering from a house fire. I started my own carpentry business in Chicago. My wife had a little trouble with her legs then. And I remember coming home one day, and my wife said she wanted to move away from her family and move to South Dakota. The conversation went something like this. You know, I was tired, and she said, Elmo, is there anybody living in your farmhouse? And I says, well, not that I know of. It's kind of out there in the middle of nowhere. And she says, is the house livable? And I says, well, as far as I know, I mean, it's a house I grew up in. If the raccoons haven't found a way to get in and break a window or tear the siding off, as far as I know, it's going to be just fine. And of course, the context of this is that our house in a very nice part of Kankakee, Illinois, Bradley, Illinois, half an hour south of Chicago, was broken into twice in about a 2-week period of time. And then our neighbor, who loved to help people, open her home at midnight because somebody needed help, so they helped them. And they took a knife and they slit her throat and left her bleed to death on the living room carpet. The kids could only ride from our house, which was in the middle of the block, to the corner and turn around and come back. And my wife says, you know what? I really want to move. I really want to go someplace where it's safe. And that was the idea here. So I made her a deal. I says, you know, we have a few things that we've saved from the fire, and we've accumulated a few things. And I says, we can't afford at this point to move it all to South Dakota. I says, by the way, when do you want to move? She says, 2 weeks. And I'm thinking, wow, get ready. It's going to take me longer than that to figure out, you know, what to take and what to leave. And I said, I tell you what, if you can start selling off what we don't need, like the kitchen table. Didn't need to take that. We can make a kitchen table out of plywood and a few pieces of 2x4, or find a used one somewhere, or like the sofa that someone had given us. You know, that's too big to haul around, and we just didn't have the money to haul it. And so the next day I come home from work, and she says, well, I have a friend that owns a consignment business. They're coming in 2 weeks, and is it okay if we move? I says, I can do the carpentry thing and the church growth thing that I was doing to help churches grow anywhere. And then we discovered there was a few items that we couldn't fit in. We had some friends, they've been lifelong friends, took a week off of work, and he had bought a new truck with a great big 8-foot box. And he said, how about if he said, I've got some vacation time. Do you mind if we come along? And I said, no, we love the company. So we had a great time. Taking that step of faith, traveling from the southern part of Chicago, Illinois, to South Dakota. And everything went great until we hit Aberdeen, South Dakota, and we were traveling north 20 miles to Highway 10, and then traveling west. And Jerry and my wife were in one of the vehicles, and Paul and I were in the other vehicle, and Jerry, who was the lady in the relationship, says to my wife with tears rolling down her eyes, where in the world are you going to? Well, we were excited. You know, it's going to be a brand new adventure. It's going to be a safe community. But, you know, for people who are not used to all this space, it's different. And it's challenging. And people think they have to have all these other people around in order to experience God's favor, in order to experience God's blessing. But you know what? We see space as being a blessing. We see life here in this part of the world, this part of the country, as being a blessing. And this is where so many people want to see their young people experiencing life. And so Abraham does something really special here. He builds an altar. Probably made it out of some rocks as a reminder that this is the place. This is the place God has chosen for us. And the question is, do we have an altar? Do we have a place? That is a special place that we can come to. And maybe it's a nice, quiet place where we can quiet ourselves down and we can just listen to God. And we can thank Him, and we can praise Him, and we can count our blessings, and we can just enjoy life, enjoy our walk relationship to Him. And then we go on. And from there he went on, Abraham did, to the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent. And with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built an altar to the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord. Oftentimes, God allows us to experience life in a wonderful way. And one day looks a lot like the next day, but there are those times of transitions that happen in our lives, and things change. And we have to remember to take time to hear God's voice. And then when God speaks to us, it's very, very important for us to obey whatever message God gives to us. It may call us out of our comfort zone. It may call us into something new. It may call us into something that's more challenging. But when God calls us, we can be assured that he will also provide for us, that he will be there. Let's pray together. Gracious God, we thank you for this time, wonderful time in American history. And we thank you for the opportunities that we have, and that we do have a place that feels like home. And we do have opportunities to encourage other people. We thank you for speaking to us through our prayer times and through your holy word and through our conversations with other people. And we thank you that even in the midst of this new challenge, not only in America but across the world, that we have ways to be a blessing. Help us to always remember that, so our faith can always be fantastic. We give you all the honor and the glory and the praise. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. It's a wonderful, great song we want to sing in closing. And Here I Am, Lord. And the story has a great story to this song. There was two friends, and one